What's up guys, it's your boy Senron and welcome to part 2 of the Rune Guide. In my last video, I talked about the basics of runes and their general importance throughout a league match. And, as previously announced, this video will solely focus on the Precision Runepath, its keystones and minor runes, and what advantages or disadvantages they each have. Alright, that concludes the introduction. I hope you enjoy part 2 of the Rune Guide. The Precision Runepath is all about dealing sustained damage. It rewards a fight-orientated playstyle, primarily for champions that rely on their basic attacks instead of their abilities. Precision is kind of a jack-of-all-trades rune tree, simply because the minor runes are fairly suitable on any champion, and because it neither forces you into an overly aggressive nor super defensive playstyle. That being said, it's time to take a look at arguably the most important part of the rune page. And what better way to start the next segment than with the currently most played keystone called Conqueror's ability text reads, dealing damage to enemy champions grants stacks of Conqueror, lasting for 5 seconds, refreshing on subsequent damage against champions, and stacking up to 12 times. Gain 2 for melee or 1 for ranged champions, stacks of Conqueror from basic attacks, and 2 stacks from abilities, spells, and item actives. Each stack of Conqueror grants bonus adaptive stats, scaling with your champion's level. At maximum stacks, you also heal for 8% for melee or 5% for ranged champions of the post-mitigation damage dealt against enemy champions. Damage over time effects and ongoing sources of damage grant stacks only once every 5 seconds. Conqueror is currently the most played keystone in League, and that is for a very good reason. It's a viable choice for almost every single champion in the game. If you don't know what keystone you should play, Conqueror is most likely gonna be usable. Conqueror's advantages aren't all too few either. The bonus adaptive force you get, plus the healing effect at max stacks, make it the ideal keystone to counter frontline champions, as they are unable to match both your healing and your damage output in extended fights, forcing them to disengage when locked in combat. Plus, you'll be able to stack Conquerors fairly quickly by attacking them, which is incredibly helpful in teamfights, as once fully stacked, you're able to turn on more important targets without having to worry about dealing too little damage or surviving their DPS. When compared to other keystones, Conqueror scales fairly well into the later stages of the game. However, it is far from useless in the early stages and thus shouldn't be disrespected. It's also great on champions that have basic attacks in their combo rotations, as Conquerors can fully stack during the rotation, giving their last and most likely most important damage spell that extra to kill a target. But chances are you'll most likely just see it on a bruiser or on a champion who wants to teamfight. You should prioritize Conqueror over other keystones if there isn't another viable keystone option, you're playing a champion that deals sustained damage, you're in a melee versus melee matchup as a solo laner, and you're only interested in extended/team fights. That being said, Conqueror does have its drawbacks. The first one is its lack of initial strength at the start of a match when compared to other keystones. Conqueror stacks are built up quite slowly, especially if you haven't unlocked all of your core abilities yet or haven't acquired much needed attack speed. It's also not that great in short trades. Conqueror thus forces you into a playstyle that revolves around long, drawn-out fights, which could potentially backfire, as extended fights not only drain your resources, but also make you sussy to the enemy jungler. The biggest downside to the keystone, however, is that Conqueror has no impact if you can't attack a target, as you're unable to stack it up. And with no stacks, the keystone is non-existent and therefore useless. So, you should avoid taking Conqueror if you're playing a very bad lane matchup, you can't build up stacks efficiently, or you're looking to end the game before teamfights even start to happen. Where Conqueror falls flat, press the attack shines. Its ability text reads, basic attacks against champions apply a stack for 4 seconds, refreshing on subsequent applications, expiring upon attacking a new champion, and stacking up to 3 times. The third stack consumes all stacks to deal 40 to 180 bonus adaptive damage and renders the target exposed for 6 seconds, causing them to take 8 to 12% increased damage from all sources for the duration. Press the attack is the ideal keystone for players who want to win lane and never leave it. Its burst damage and damage increase make dueling or small skirmishes a breeze, so if you choose to play PTA, make sure to expect to go for a lot of aggressive and short heavy trades. It's one of the best early game keystones due to the bonus damage after 3 consecutive attacks and its relatively low cooldown. You want to prioritize press the attack over other keystones if you want to stomp your lane opponent, or if your champion synergizes with its effect. Some champions perform multiple basic attacks with one of their abilities. Renekton or Pantheon are great examples, as their empowered W abilities instantly proc the effect and leave the victim vulnerable to everything else they use on them. This is why you often see these champions taking PTA. But, you know, some people just choose to play this keystone to be even more obnoxious during the laning phase. Winning lane is not gonna win you the game alone though, so press the attack obviously will have its downsides as well. For one, you are required to basic attack the same target 3 times before the effect even procs. If you swap your target mid-fight or are unable to land in that last shot, then PTA will have no effect and thus will be non-existent, in other words, useless. Target swaps will happen fairly often in teamfights or even bigger skirmishes, even if you're unaware of it, and other runes simply perform better than PTA in that regard. Same thing with long trades. Compared to, for example, Conqueror, PTA is kinda bad in extended fights. Worse even is the fact that it has to be basic attacks, not abilities that connect to a target, which automatically puts you at a risk for jungle ganks or even roams, as you have to get close to an enemy champion who might just be baiting you to step up to die. And if you do die, or have to take a bad reset, then the keystone won't help you get back into the game either, as the damage increase won't matter if you don't deal any to begin with. You should avoid taking press the attack if your champion is not based on basic attacks, your champion sucks in early, the matchup is not leaning in your favor, priority isn't needed from your lane, and if you want to play more for team fights and not duels. Lethal Tempo shares many similarities with Conqueror. Its ability text reads: passive. Basic attacks on attack against enemy champions grant a stack for 6 seconds, refreshing on subsequent attacks and stacking up to 6 times. Gain 10 to 15% for melee and 4 to 9% for ranged champions based on level, bonus attack speed for each stack, up to 60 to 90% for melee or 24 to 54% for ranged champions at maximum stacks, at which you also gain 50 bonus attack range and increase the attack speed cap to 10 attacks per second. This already sounds like the perfect marksman keystone for hypercarry champions such as Jinx, Twitch or Kog'Maw. And that would be right. Hypercarry range champions do love LT, as their kit perfectly synergizes with the keystone's strength. Yet, you'd be surprised that it sometimes sees play on some basic attack-based bruisers too. This is because, just like Conqueror, it does extremely well in extended trades or teamfights and enables certain champion and all-in playstyle which they otherwise wouldn't have. It scales well into the later stages of a match, but does do fairly well early, especially if you're looking for a cheeky cheese on your laner. You should consider taking Lethal Tempo if your champion is based on basic attacks. You like the idea of being a glass cannon. You like front-to-back teamfights, you're facing a lot of tanks, or/and if the game will last longer than 30 minutes. That being said, LT has its fair share of drawbacks as well. Similarly to Conqueror, Lethal Tempo forces you into a playstyle in which you try to permanently stay in combat. This, again, can bait enemies to you for a free kill or drain your health and mana, forcing you to take an awkward base. Even worse is the fact that it has to be basic attacks for the stacks and not abilities, which forces you to position yourself closer to the enemy. Lethal Tempo also gets countered by disengage, as you won't be able to fully stack up and will have to spend some time resetting the effect at the start or continuation of the next fight, which could backfire hard. If you're unable to step up to attack, then you won't be able to get stacks in the first place, making the rune non-existent and therefore useless. And while an all-in playstyle sounds like fun, I want to quickly remind you that Yasuo players typically run Lethal Tempo as their primary keystone. And I'm pretty damn sure that you yourself have experienced the 0.17 power spike firsthand. You should avoid taking Lethal Tempo if you're not playing a champion that's based on basic attacks, you won't be able to step up to basic attack, you're playing a champion based on short trades or burst, or if you're playing a melee champion into a lot of ranged champions. Fleet Footwork is the odd one out, as its use differs strongly from its Keystone siblings. Its ability text reads, Energized. Moving and basic attacking generates charges, up to 100. At 100 charges, become energized, empowering your next basic attack to heal you for 10 to 100 based on level, plus 30% bonus AD, plus 20% AP, and grant you 20% bonus movement speed for 1 second. Against minions, the healing is less effective, 20% for melee and half of that for ranged champions. Fleet Footwork is the keystone you choose if you either know that you're gonna lose your lane hard and you don't want to intentionally feed too much, or if you want your champion to be more mobile and healthy during the laning phase. This keystone is all about sustain. The bonus movement speed is nice for spacing as well, especially on ranged champions, but the primary reason people choose Fleet is to heal back up from unavoidable damage they'll eventually receive. Fleet isn't entirely useless in short trades either, as the healing and movement speed allows you to disengage or re-engage after trading without the risk of taking a lot of damage. You should take Fleet Footwork if you're playing against a long-range poke champion and you have no way of reaching them, you're playing a lane that's all about short and quick trades, you don't want to intentionally feed, and if you feel like you want to smell the Zaza. While a defensive playstyle might include fewer throws or risks in general, one can't forget that League itself isn't a tower defense game. People are going to punish your low-risk playstyle at some point, and if that point happens to be before you reach one of your spikes, you might have a very bad time. Fleet Footwork sucks after the laning phase, and in pretty much all other scenarios as well, except for maybe a 1 versus 1, and even then, that can be situational as well. Sure, you might be able to sidestep more skill shots with the bonus movement speed, but there are better keystones for players that just want to run around like a monkey. You should avoid taking Fleet Footwork if you're playing a favorable matchup, you want to play for skirmishes or team fights, or if you're better off playing for extended fights / trades. Precision's minor runes are fairly versatile, so there's always going to be a viable option for your champion in each slot. Just keep in mind though that you can only choose one out of each row. Slot 1 of Precision is revolved around combat. The 3 minor runes are called Overheal, Triumph, and Presence of Mind. Overheal, as the name implies, overheals you, in a way. It makes it so that excess healing from either spells or attacks converts to a maximum health shield. The conversion scales with your champion's level. After 6 seconds have passed, the shield decays by 1% of its maximum value every 0.25 seconds. Receiving healing or dealing or taking damage will refresh the shield duration to 6 seconds. The maximum shield amount you can get is capped at 11% of your max health. Health regeneration and health regenerating abilities will not apply Overheal. However, all forms of lifesteal will apply it. This makes Overheal the go-to choice if you either play with a champion that can consistently heal you, or if your champion synergizes well with lifesteal. This rune is also very matchup dependent. The biggest mistake I've seen new players make is taking Overheal into matchups in which you get poked. I get that the idea of having a shield up to counter the poke damage sounds like a more billion IQ move, but it doesn't work that way in practice. Keep in mind that you can only get the shield from excess healing, not just in general. So if a poke champion hits an ability on you, you will have to heal back up before you can get a shield from Overheal again. The shield amount isn't that huge either, and you probably won't have the items during the laning phase to maximize its effect anyways. So only choose it if one or both of these criteria are met. Next up is Triumph. Triumph is a passive effect that heals you for 5% of your missing health and 2.5% of your max health, and grants you 20 additional gold after scoring a takedown against an enemy champion. Triumph is one of the best minor runes in League in my opinion, and that is for a very good reason. It's almost unmatched in its versatility and synergizes with every single champion in the game, as free gold and health is something no one would say no to. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen people clutch a play just by running Triumph, in which they otherwise would have died horribly. This minor rune allows you to tower dive without the fear of death and snowball just a bit harder from the additional gold you get. It's also especially good in lower ranks, as kills there are a very common occurrence. Presence of Mind is a passive effect that increases mana and energy regeneration for 4 seconds after damaging an enemy champion. The scaling scales with your level and is a little weaker for ranged champions. Upon scoring a takedown, you instantly restore 15% of your maximum mana or energy. This is a pretty solid choice for players who struggle with resource management. Choose POM over the other two if the champion you're playing is either mana hungry or energy based. Slot 2 of Precision is focused on scaling combat strength. The 3 minor runes in this category are called Legend Alacrity, Legend Tenacity, and Legend Bloodline. Legend Alacrity is a passive effect that permanently grants you 3% bonus attack speed plus an additional 1.5% for every stack, up to a maximum of 10 stacks. Stack progress is earned for every champion takedown, epic monster takedown, large monster kill, or minion kill. This rune is sort of a no-brainer pick for champions that revolve around attack speed. That's pretty much it. Legend Tenacity is a passive effect that permanently grants you 5% tenacity plus an additional 1.5% for every stack, up to a maximum of 10 stacks. Stack progress is earned the same way as Legend Alacrities. Choose this if you're playing a champion that doesn't need attack speed or lifesteal, or if you're facing a composition with a lot of crowd control. Genuinely the most versatile choice for this slot, especially for melee champions. Legend Bloodline is a passive effect that permanently grants you 0.35% lifesteal for every legend stack, up to a maximum of 15 stacks. Once you reach max stacks, you also gain 85 additional maximum health. Stack progress is earned the same way as both prior ones. This rune is only really viable for AD carries. Lifesteal generally synergizes with high attack damage stats, and the 85 max health is great for squishies too. However, the rune takes quite some time to be noticeable, and lifesteal is only good in a meta with extended fights. If you get one shot, there's no point in healing over time. So choose Legend Bloodline if you're sure that you won't insta-pop in a fight and will be able to deal damage consistently with your basic attacks. Slot 3 of Precision is all about dealing more damage to enemy champions. The 3 minor runes are called Coup de Grâce, Cut Down, and Last Stand. Coup de Grâce is a passive effect that gives you an 8% damage increase against champions who have less than 40% of their health. This is the most reliable choice for the slot, simply because you're gonna be proccing it a lot without you even noticing it. It allows you to secure kills easier, threaten low HP enemies, and is a fairly great pickup for burst-orientated champions or into winning matchups in which your opponent is bound to be at low HP a lot. Cut Down is a passive effect that gives you between 5 to 15% more damage against champions based on how much more max health they have compared to you. The damage scales linearly against champions with 10% to 100% more max health than you. Choose this if you're playing a squishy champion and are facing 3 or more tanks, bruisers, battle mages, or Rod of Ages abusers. Quick word of warning though, Cut Down sucks for the laning phase as it's pretty much non-existent because everyone has similar max health, but shines the longer a game goes, especially if you're able to consistently poke or damage their frontline without getting punished. Last Stand gives you a 5 to 11% damage increase against champions depending on how much of your max health you've lost. The effect starts at below 60% of your maximum health and reaches its full strength at 30% of your max health or lower. Last Stand synergizes with champions that want to all in, as they will most likely tank a decent amount of damage before reaching their intended target. Champions such as Sylas, Warwick, and Olaf synergize extremely well with Last Stand as their kit is built around fighting at low health. Besides that, it's also a great choice for heavy training matchups as it brings more value to the table than both other runes. And that concludes the Precision Rune Path. The next part, which will be out in roughly 2 weeks, will focus on the Domination Rune Path. If you have any questions or feedback so far, let me know down in the comments.